All right, guys, the plan for today, I'm going to give you a couple pieces of advice or insight. I know it's Monday, but I'm going to get on my Sunday pulpit, and then we'll open it up to questions, clarifications from you guys. I never want someone to not have something answered going into the week of a test. Good morning. No, you're fine. I did that on purpose. I appreciate that. I really do. I appreciate that you guys know that I have ticks and tisms and rules and that you want to follow them. I really do appreciate that. Is that rain? Sure. All right, so let me shoot you straight. The second test is much harder than the first test, but not that I make it harder. It's just the first test I make easy because I'm trying to build your confidence. I'm trying to get you to speak this new language. I'm trying to get you to see these new concepts. And sometimes less is more. But now that I've accomplished all that, we can play. So in the first test, I might say, it's like, don't miss your 3-foot putts. Don't miss your easy ones. There's no 3-foot putts on this test. However, there's no questions we haven't gone over. There's no questions that I haven't taught you. So what I think the second test does is it separates the students, my everydayers. And I don't mean that coming to class. People that just watch the videos consistently, the people that stay up with the information, doing what you're supposed to do. You know, this is transactions. Go through the line at the coffee shop or wherever you go, and you expect there to be reciprocity there. You give me caffeine, and I give you money for it. We don't need to bring, as Mitch Hedberg said, we don't need to bring pen and paper to this. Why don't you just give me the coffee and I'll give you the money? I come here 3 days a week when we have it, and I try to do my best to be a teacher. Notice rarely do I read from slides. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you guys can read from slides. I try to teach difficult concepts that I see consistently over 20 years that people struggle with, not because of your fault, just the way our brains are wired sometimes. It tends to get us down these certain roads. Okay? So I'm your teacher, and I'm also your kinesiology counselor to try to see through these things. So the second test is tough, but it doesn't have to be tough. Some of you, this is going to be very easy. I expect several 100s. People understand the transactional nature of this class. And if you think about it, and I don't think I'm speaking to anybody that I'm looking at right now, because I see familiar faces. But if you think about it, it would be impossible if my tests were tricky. It'd be impossible to make a 100 off, because you'd be guessing, and the law of large numbers says eventually you'd guess wrong. So that means if there's multiple hundreds, that means they were able to figure out the answers based off of what I told you. And that's it. Every question is something we've talked about. However, if you come into my office and say, I don't understand why this is external rotation, I've got nothing for you. I'm not going to boot you out of office. I'm going to literally give you the same lecture that I gave several weeks ago about it. It looks like it's internal, but it's internal. Those are the kind of questions that people are going to use, the kind that I'll warn you. Right? So tough love is still love. So I just want to prepare you guys. And I know it sounds contraindicated. If you're prepared, if you've been preparing these past few weeks, probably not anything to worry about. If you haven't started looking at this stuff yet, and you're literally starting today, toes to fingers, I'm sure a lot of this stuff would be very confusing and overwhelming. But you haven't done your part of our transaction in this kinesiology coffee. And for that, I got nothing. I got no tip for you. Huh? See what I did there? So that being said, respect test number 2, because test number 1 was more of a 3-foot putt. Let's open it up for questions, clarifications. You might say, you might have gone back through the lectures and say, on this, you said this, or I'm confused about that. This is the chance that we can kind of clarify, making sure you have everything on point. Because guys, I'm old. I go to bed early. So Tuesday evening, if you message me, text me, because again, I have 24-hour office hours, if I'm awake or if I'm available. But it's very common, I'll wake up in the morning, go to my office, I have 5 emails asking me about questions, or I have 3 text messages asking me for questions. I'm ripping Van Winkle, right? So let's do it now. Anybody have any questions? Remember, I'm not asking. I don't want to hear, can you do some examples? We've done 1,000 examples. I want clarification questions, fine-tuning questions, specific questions about specific examples. Does that make sense? Like when you did this. To start off, questions, clarifications, any of that kind of stuff. Who wants to break the ice? Bueller. Famous movies. What are you, let me ask you this, what are you most, it's not even about concern, but if you had to rank all of the joints and articulations that you're accountable for, what would be your range of confidence? In other words, which joint do you feel the most confident in? Like you wish I'd ask you 30 questions about just that? And which one are you like, what's my range here? The hip is the most uncomfortable. Okay, I'm going to put a pin in that. And what about the most comfortable? Right. Ankle most comfortable. I remember it's all fun and games until you tell me that subtalar joint is ankle stuff, right? Okay. All right. So ankle to hip. What is it, if you don't mind sharing, what is it do you think about the hip that's kind of weird or that's most confusing?
That's what I'm thinking about that baseball.
Oh, gotcha. So specifically, not.
Specifically the left hip.
Gotcha. Okay. Now you see, I can work with that because that's a specific example. But it's not, you have a problem with the hip when it looks like it's moving and it is. It's the illusion stuff. Okay. I can work with that because that is a specific example. One of the things we have to remember or consider is that on our first test, we did stuff like this. And I think we've done it enough. I think everybody's pretty comfortable with this concept, right? Where the leg that's on the ground doesn't appear to move traditionally, but it moved nonetheless. Right? The leg that's in the air looked like it moved traditionally, but it didn't move nonetheless. Are we good with that? Now, all we're doing for this test is we're taking this concept and we're applying it in the 2 other planes of motion that we. So in other words, instead of sagittal illusions, we're going to go, and I'm going to get to your baseball question, but we're going frontal illusions. Sorry for the horrible artwork, but it's the same illusion. But instead of, let's see if I can see if my ballerina training is paid off. First test, all we're doing is this. For the front, I mean, it's the same thing. From here to there is very similar as here to there, just in a different plane. One looks like it's moving and it's not. One looks like it's not moving and it is. Walking you down a path. We're good so far? Do you see the similarities in first test question, second test question? So now all we have to do is apply that same concept to the transverse plane. And if you remember, transverse plane, apple, banana, strawberry, sledgehammer. Sagittal is going to have some general motion, frontal is going to have some general motion, but transverse is just going to be more pure rotation. So there won't be as much linear, obvious things happening when we're spinning, purely spinning. It's the same concept. The same concept that says from here to there, it looks like it's moving and it is the same as here to here. It looks like it's not moving and it is. These are the same changes in angle. Transverse plane says from here to there, right external hip rotation, when it looks like it's moving and it is. My patella, because I like to use my patella because it's always going to represent my femur. My toes may not, right? I could bend my knee and all of a sudden I can't see my toe. But when I go here, my patella is facing lateral outside of my pelvis, into the eyes of the pelvis, the penguin in the pelvis. Anatomical, external, it's lateral. So therefore, right external hip rotation, when I move the socket about the ball, is actually like this. My patella is facing lateral to my penguin in the pelvis, my eyes in the pelvis. Make sense? Okay. We're going to get to the batter. If traditional motion is where it's at, we can still use it, but only to go back to where we started. That's why position is so important in this class. What I mean by that is traditional external rotation. How would I have to move to go back to where I started? Traditional internal rotation. Traditional external, traditional internal. Now watch this sleight of hand. Non-traditional external. How would I have to move to go back to where I started? Traditional internal. Everything's lined back up. I'll do that one more time. Non-traditional external can be shown or proven by just doing traditional internal. Therefore, I had to have external rotation when I left. Does that make sense? Go ahead. We're going to get to the battle. Well, first of all, for the knee to have internal and external rotation, my knee has to be flexed. So in these examples, unless I ripped out my socket, I can't have knee internal and external rotation because my knees are extended. They're locked in. It's called a screw-home mechanism. They're locked into place because what you don't want is you don't want a long bone to be able to spin on both sides. That's why your elbow doesn't spin. Your radial ulnar joint and your shoulder does, because if your humerus could spin on both sides, it'd be hard to really functionally hold on to stuff. So our knees can't rotate when we're locked. When we're unlocked, then we can rotate our knee. But what we can't really do when our knees are flexed, here's my femur, here's my tibia. When my knee is flexed, I do not want to rotate my femur transversely. That would be a bad day. The knee rotation is going to be here, or the knee rotation. Yeah. The axis, the spin of the basketball is going to be here because we don't want to rip apart our knee. Make sense? Okay, so going back to the baseball example. Traditional, non-traditional, traditional shows you how you had to move. So let's apply that to the batter swing. One of the reasons this one is hard for people to see is because you were learned traditional motion, which I got no problem with, but you were never taught that human joint motions can look non-traditional. So in your brain, you're saying lefty-loosey, righty-tighty every time. And so when you learn external rotation as being lateral spin, your brain wants to account anything that moves this way as the same motion, and it's not. So for our batter example, if I'm going here, I have a non-traditional motion on my left hip. So the easiest way for me to show you that you can prove that this was internal rotation Let me come out to the side a little bit to make sure everybody could see. The easiest way that I could show you that this is non-traditional internal rotation is to say, how would I have to rotate my hip traditionally to go back to anatomical? Wouldn't I have to externally rotate it? Aha! So therefore, I had to have internal rotation when I left home. It's cool, huh? You get it? And that's what teaching's all about for me. It's about keep grinding, keep grinding, keep grinding. And then once that light bulb goes off, you're going to have that rest of your life. You get your money's worth. But that's what's happening, is that our brains want to assign anything that spins this way the same, but it's not. Just like that's not the same. So to me, the easiest way, and that's why, like on the test, we encourage people to move. Sit in the corner if you have to. When I ask that kind of question, feel free to get up and say, okay, I know this is one that messes with my brain. I'm in anatomical rotationally. Now I'm not in anatomical rotationally. Some people might see, oh, I'm internally rotated, so therefore to go from anatomical to being internally rotated, I have to have internal rotation. Some people will do it that way, that's fine. But some people may say, let me go back home traditionally, and therefore I can prove how I left home non-traditionally. Thank you for that question. Thank you for that specific question. For these reviews, I don't want to do open-ended stuff like, can you do all the scapula stuff? This isn't, I have lectures that do that. I go back to an old lecture to see me teach about all the scapula stuff. I want this to be specific examples of clarification. So we're good? All right. Thank you for breaking the ice. Who else? Give me a little more. Give me an exercise. No. It could be layman's terms, but just give me, you know what we're doing here? I'm teaching you to practice coming up with practice questions. Outstanding. I knew you could do it. I knew you could do it. Think about what we're doing here, guys. By you coming up with specific questions, it's teaching you and practicing how to come up with specific practice questions, right? So awesome. Let's do that. Do that. Have zero problem going over specific questions. Yoink. Let's find a good before and after. Now, on the test, especially ball and sockets and shoulders that can move in combinational things, I'm going to make sure to clarify either in the question or in the answers what plane I'm talking about. So in other words, to separate the abs and the ads from the flexions and the extensions, right? So if it's on the question, it'll literally say the sagittal component or the frontal component. If I say sagittal, you know I'm asking flexion extension. Or in the answers, like if all the answers say is ab and adduction, then I'm not asking you about the sagittal. Does that make sense? It's like one of my sayings, Luke, you probably heard me say this a lot of times in your interview choices. If it can be one of them, then it can be none of them. But like one of the answers is correct. You can't be like, well, what about this other answer? That's not on. It's not on. Kind of common sense, but I know sometimes taking these tests, there's a lot of anxiety. All right, we are going to practice asking each other questions or asking ourselves questions. So here we have your exercise. Now you tell me, do you want to go left to right or right to left? Awesome. So there's your question. Last pull down, we found a photo on here. I didn't have this pre-planned, I just found one that had a before and an after. And then you said we're gonna go left to right. Is that correct? My short-term memory. So what are some things we can analyze? Again, we're practicing stuff. We analyze motion joint by joint. I see position changes at the elbow. So that's something we can talk about. I see position changes in the shoulder. Probably from that view, mostly frontal. And I see position changes in the scapulars. So those in particular, remember on the test, I'm not going to ask you small little changes in the grades, in the obvious changes in position. Remember, motion is just changing position. Call it. So if you know the position you started and you know the position you finish in, that's Lindsay's equation kind of concept, then you know how you have to get there. So let's do that. Let's do elbow, shoulder, and scapula. And once you get those answers, I'll give you some different ways I can ask it on the test. So left to right. But you could go right to left. Like that's part of it. What was that? I know this one about primary machine. Well, if it's on the answer choices, like in other words, if I say that's kind of good, this is what this class is. It's similar to what I said over there. Like if I give you downward rotation and upward rotation, don't say, don't go all in on retraction if one of my answers is correct here. And also as a reminder, I'll usually give upward and downward rotation, give shoulder stuff, just to get sure. I say, oh, the arms are going up. I need this position as off, I want it to come down. So I tend to ask the upward and downward rotation with the shoulders as an extra element, as an extra element. I never do so with the outside value non-traditional about. All right, here's some help. Weird. In the real world, only clock hands move about the clock. But in our world, clock hands move and the clock moves. That's what makes us unique. Because engineers, I've had classes with a lot of engineers when I was at Auburn. They couldn't wrap their mind around that concept. Like that's why human motion is harder, because that door will always move about the wall, but not in the human body. We can move the wall about the door. We can move the wall in the door. Right? All right, we analyze motion joint by joint. Where do you want to start? Let's start with the easy one. Let's build our confidence up. If you had $100 on the line to get one of those joint motions right, wouldn't you go elbow? Yeah, that's how I would go. So elbow, start to finish, change in position. What did you see? Uh-huh. Good. So bilateral elbow flexion, right? Bilateral just means both sides, the right and the left. Add flexion from left to right. And if we went from right to left, it would just be extension, right? Bilateral elbow extension. Okay, so we broke the ice, we're building our confidence. Now this is how I do it. I like to go to shoulder before I go to scapula, because I know that shoulder and scapula have like this partnership, that they're kind of functionally working together to help you do certain functional tasks. So frontal plane with the shoulder from left to right, I'm abducted, and you can even look at it in terms of degrees. And even if you don't care, just layman's terms, I'm abducted. Yeah, way abducted. And when you finish, you're like, well, I'm still abducted. I'm abducted a lot less. So the only way to go from being abducted a lot to being abducted a lot less is to have adductions. Adduction. Boom. And I know my scapula can help with that, bringing the whole clock down. So when I have shoulder abduction, my scapula is going to have downward rotation. And again, you could look, we could talk about how when you go up, probably there's going to be some elevation. When you come down, there's probably going to be some depression. If you want to squeeze back, there'll probably be some retraction. But if one of the answers, if I give you upward and downward rotation, give them the Caesar with Caesars. Those other things, not that they're not there, but that's just not what I'm asking. So don't, I think that's where sometimes people overanalyze. They're like, well, what about the knee? The knee moved. No, I'm just not asking you about the knee as anything, right? Just answer what I'm asking you. And don't go down these rabbit holes of other stuff that may or may not be there. I might ask you about later. But if I'm asking, and this is why I think scratch paper can be of benefit, because on your scratch paper, it's not silly. But if I'm asking you about shoulder in the frontal and scapula, then like literally shoulder, scapula, like just keep the train on the tracks and don't derail for other stuff. And if we go right to left, that would be ab and upward rotation. Coming back down, add and down. And again, I'm not disrespecting the elevation and the depression. When I do ask retraction stuff though, it's going to be questions that are more in your front to back. Like this is more of an up down, right? So if I'm asking the retraction and the protraction, that's going to be more to help your functional circle go forward. So again, I'm not disrespecting the fact that she is probably retracting right there. It's just this kind of question I'll probably ask you about the upward downward rotation, because this is a great view of how the clock and the clock hand work together. The retraction question would probably come more from like the middle of the road, where you need your retraction to help you function the circle a little bit in the thought. And was that helpful? Did you get all that right, son? Awesome. Do you have a follow-up question? Maybe it rhymes with full sub. Oh, that's a good idea. A pull up. What did and I know you come every class. What did I warn you about the names of those exercises? Like we got to call them something, you know. We all have names. We have to call them something, but sometimes what we call them can mess with the illusionary views. So lat pull down and pull up actually work in the same muscles when you have the same motions through the same contractions. But the fact that the bar is going down and you go up messes with our brains, okay? So let's take a look at the pull up. Great suggestion. Okay. This is, I'd say if I asked my wife, she would say this is probably exactly what I would look like when I'm doing pull-ups. And my son, if you ask my son, he'd say, yeah, it's the only difference. I probably have more tats. Let's analyze it, you guys. Let's analyze it joint by joint. Do the easy one first, break the ice, build up your confidence, and then I will go shoulder to next. I would say the scapula collapse. I would try to get as much clues as I could. And then go to, oh, my apologies, you want to go back to the eyebrow? I love it, let's mix it up. Let's mix it up. Let's mix it up like a Delcom daiquiri. Yeah. I could see how this one could probably have a little bit more functional tasks of elevation and depression because you're trying to get your chin over that bar, right? So you might help out a little bit more. Wow, that makes sense. But I would still ask you about upward and downward rotation with shoulder motion because that's the most obvious thing. So this is where the illusions happen. Ups and downs, pull up, left, pull down. It's one reason why we don't assume. I don't want the exercise to suggest what's happening. I want to see what's happening. I want to analyze my position when I start. I want to analyze my position when I finish. And I want to see what motion had happened in it. That's it. Rinse, wash, repeat. It's the same process, just applied to different people, different looking people, meaning sometimes some people are short, sometimes some people are tall, sometimes some people are big, sometimes some people are small. Sometimes some people have really unique ranges of motion. Sometimes people are hypermobile, hypomobile. The hand is going to be different every time, but the more we play, the better we get at the game. No different than wrestling, no different than softball, basketball, baseball, or picking NCAA tournament brackets. Unfortunately, I don't think that one matters. All right, let's start with elbow. Okay. What happens to the elbow from right to left? Outstanding. Bilateral elbow extension. Remember, one of the reasons why we want to, excuse me, we want to identify side joint motion, side joint motion, side joint motion is spelled out. It's a flex of the skin. And also, my right doesn't have to do with my left skin, it can do different things. So bilateral, both sides, both elbows have extension on everything. Good. And what about shoulders? Good, good. Bilateral shoulder, abduction. Another word of warning. This happens all the time. Lindsay and I get this. We've seen it several times. Students on the test miss things because they confuse ab and adduction. Guys, I don't know what to tell you. I didn't name these things, and I wish they didn't sound so similar. But that's why I do silly things like ab, or AD, because ab and adduction just sound very. How could the scapula help my abduction going from top to bottom? Outstanding. Outstanding. Because the scapula doesn't care what the exercise is called. Scapula doesn't care. The scapula just knows, oh, the shoulders are abducting. Let me reposition the clocks to help get those arms above my head. Cool. Any follow-up questions or any other specific? Remember, I do not mind answering or clarifying specific questions. What we're not going to do today is say, can you give me some leg examples? Nope. You can help me find an example and we can talk about it. This is good for helping you guys learn how to study. Yeah. Can you reiterate this about the scapulus? Absolutely. So on the picture on the right, and keep in mind that the clock that's on the left is just a mirrored clock on the right. And so in other words, 9 on this side would just be 9 on that side, so they're mirrors of each other. When you start here, the clock hand, the humerus, let's say is at 7 o'clock. When you go here, not only are you moving the clock hand, but you're also moving the clock to get your arm into that position. And we call moving the clock like this upward and downward rotation. In class, I think we did that on that. We did like a little lab day where we put our hands on the back, and some of you were able to feel like the scapula literally move away from your hand to show you how it's doing this on your rib cage. It's orbiting your rib cage back there. It's inside. Speaking of NCAA tournaments, the #1 overall seed, Auburn. That's where I went to school. Talking like I'm from Alabama, from Delaware. Anything else? Yeah.
So information that.
Okay. Okay. Um. So what at least you were showing it to me. So let's do. I guess if I asked you position is for radial on a joint, prone or supine? Don't answer it right away. Use the clues, use the techniques that I taught you. I taught you a very specific technique that's only taught by me. But I'm not saying that someone might have come up with it too, which is totally fine. But you're not going to get this in a book. In a book, all you're going to get is traditional motion. But there's non-traditional ways to have these motions. And was, you know, you gotta go overlay laws, cheat. Oh, much here about the overlay law. So using the technique that I taught you, I had to use for it, very scientific. That's I ran out of ammunition on that. But it works all the time. Or all the time. Let me ask you this, is her thumb on globally? And I know what you're saying. Can't let it look her has to be a full question. Is the thumb on the top or is the thumb on the bottom? The picture. Was that? Is her thumb on the top of her hand or on the bottom of her that picture? Her top, thank you. It's on the top. Right. Yeah. So her thumb's on the top. Now, if we did have the thumb rule, people would, I say people, the only reason I'm saying this, guys, is because when I meet with students to go over tests, it's a learning experience for me as well. Because when a student misses a question, I get to say, why did you answer it that way? And that's where we get some really cool insight. So what students will say is, they'll say, well, I'm here. And if I bring it back down, I'm here. You see what happened? They literally moved their radioulnar joint as they came back down. Because if you kept your radioulnar joint here and you brought everything back, you would actually be here. Does that make sense? That's why we do things like the thumb rule, so that we don't trick ourselves when we bring it back down and actually move our radioulnar joints. If you kept your radioulnar joint pronated and did this, your thumb would be at the bottom. Does that make sense? Well, we know the thumb is not at the bottom, the thumb is at the top. So I have to be supinated. I have to be supine. And that's why we have the thumb B. Because you can see the thumb and say, is the thumb on the lateral part of the arm or on the medial part of the arm? And if you just walk down the thumb, walk down the forearm, you'd be like, oh, it's on the lateral side. It has to be supinated. Make sense? That also goes to people that when we do this one, they want to make everything global. So what they want to do is they want to say, well, my soup cup is facing down up here, so I need my soup cup to face down when I bring it down. It's like you just moved your radioulnar joint, you just changed your position. If you didn't change your position, your soup cup down here would actually be facing up. Make sense? That's why we do the thumb rule. I'm supine. I'm prone. Pronation. Supination. Thumb rule. Thumb rule will give you a big thumbs up on the test. I didn't know if that was the fish you were trying to catch, but was that what you fishing for, like that, those kind of examples?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I remember. You know what I call that move? I call that move the razzle dazzle. You gotta hit the razzle dazzle. I am weird. I know. I will be weird again. First, let's make sure we're starting in the same position. Let's go anatomical. Let's flex those shoulders. Let's pronate and internally rotate so that our hands are facing out. And then let's go right over left. And then let's do A to B, and then B to C. And we did this in class. So if you go back to I think it was our radioulnar joint video. So if we don't have enough time here, just go back to the old video and rewatch before we go over it in detail. The reason we want to go A, B, and B, C is because from A to B, something happens at our wrists and our shoulders that are not the same as when we come back up. So that's why we have to say, from A to B, I'll show you the obvious. My wrists have wrist flexion from here to here, and then I have wrist extension from there to there. So if I just went from A all the way to B, I wouldn't see that wrist motion. Hi, Mom. Just wait a minute, Mom. Tired, fifth grade teacher. We analyze motion joint by joint. So we don't, and that's important because a lot of our emotions, especially our compound motion, a lot of stuff going on. And it's easily distractible when you got all this stuff happening. So to make it easier for our brains to process, we just say, all right, let me start at the ankle. Let me look at the subtalar. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that here because we're just moving upward, but it's similar. In the real world, we got a lot of stuff happening. So we have to have a process to filter the complex into, oh, it looks complex, but it's actually, it only looks complex because it's made up of multiple simple things. A lot of simple things can be complex, you know? If you're running behind on chores, each chore is simple, but the sum total of all of them seems overwhelming. So that's what we're trying to work through. We're trying to say, all right, it is overwhelming because it's a lot. So let's just break it up and look at it chore by chore by chore, because each chore in itself can be simple. All right, start. Finish. My elbows from A to B had bilateral elbow flexion. My shoulders from A to B had bilateral horizontal abduction. Right? My wrists from A to B had bilateral wrist flexion. And my radial ulnar joints from A to B started out prone, and now I am semi-prone, so I had to have a little bit of supination. From B to C, my wrists extended, my shoulders horizontally adducted. My elbows didn't do anything in terms of they flexed from A to B, but they stayed flexed from B to C. And my radial ulnar joints had more supination.
Will there be like external rotation?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, bilateral shoulder. However, that external rotation is going to happen from B to C. Right. So from A to B, my shoulders didn't externally rotate, but from here to here, absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a question about that one.
Is
Was there some challenge?
oh, absolutely. 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 Yeah, but this is not us looking at the radial ulnar joint. Doesn't disrespect all the other stuff happening.
Yeah.
It's just a good example for the radial ulnar joint, because most students have only been introduced to radial ulnar joint motion like this, and not when you have a fixed grip and the radius. I think this is one of the best examples that I give in class, because it's just so cool. You taught this, but the radial ulnar joint can work like this, where this stays fixed and the radius orbits around the ulna non-traditionally. And it's hard to see. That's why we need these landmarks to help guide us there. But yeah, I'm not disrespecting like the shoulder abduction or the rotation or the elbow flexion. It's just, this is a good one to see the harder radial ulnar joint stuff. Because the radial ulnar joint has to move with the shoulder in order to keep your fingers under the bar. If your radial ulnar joint didn't orbit around the ulna when you would come up, now all of that weight would be under your thumbs. Who has study groups planned?
On Tuesday at 2.
Outstanding.
Tomorrow in the lab. Anybody wants to. And if you can't make it, you can always text and see, like when you're available, so. You have other things.
What time? Tuesday at
Tuesday,
Tuesday at 2.
Max, if you want to run up, be there. And if you can come later.
No promises. No promises, but what I might do if I can come back is, I'm not going to be in there. I want that to be totally you guys and Lindsay, but I might set up my computer and record the review session, but no guarantees. All right, so try to come if you can. Was today helpful? Good. Today helpful? Good. All right, guys. Y'all be safe.